We haven't been together in a while. It's been a while since we recorded one of these. Do you feel like we're ready to go, or what's your sense?
I feel like we're showing a lot of deep rust already on the wheels. Mm-hmm. I think, whereas with most people, once they kind of get back in the flow, the rust is knocked off the wheels. I feel like we're just going to gather more rust as we go.
You think we're going to get rustier?
Yes.
And more awkward than we already are.
Some might argue that's the hook of our podcast. So,
the rustiness?
Yes.
Hey everybody, welcome to Co-Pilots. I am Sean Conroy.
And I'm Andy Secunda.
On this podcast, we talk about TV pilots, the first episodes of television shows. Sometimes pilots become long-running series. Others don't make it past that first episode.
We're going to talk about all of them. The great pilots, the bad pilots, the weird pilots, the forgotten pilots. We are TV writers, but it should be noted that we are the dumbest TV writers you know, so all of these are just our dumb opinions.
So dumb.
Well, Andy, I don't know about you, but I came here today to discuss a television program by the name of Slow Horses.
That's right. Luckily, I did too. That was why I also joined.
So we prepared for that at the same time.
I don't remember this being a part of our usual sort of discussions, because Slow Horses is definitely a show that would be up both of our alleys, and it clearly was.
Right.
And we had just realized we'd done Patriot. It was one of the last ones we did. But whatever the case, it's like very much in the vein of that. Maybe not quite as dry and surreal on some level as Patriot, but it definitely has a lot of it's filled with the same cynicism and kind of odd, hostile subtext. Would you say Slow Horses also has some heart hidden in it? In the same way that Patriot does? Not to the level.
No, I think it does. I think it absolutely does. I think that even in the pilot, as shitty a person as
Jackson Lamb
comes across, you also get a sense that he cares about people and cares about the world, you know?
I think that's what the charm of it is.
Yeah, he is supposed to be... and he works very hard to come across to other people as like, I'm just a piece of shit and fuck yourself. But there is another level to it, you know?
Which is kind of what's kind of wonderful about that aspect of it. First of all, I think just in terms of my taste, I like a character like that that's pretending to be a terrible person or is harnessing the terrible aspects of their personality in some ways for good, but it also tracks perfectly because he is an MI5 operative, and as such, it's to the advantage of his work to pretend like he either doesn't care about the job or that he is openly not working towards an end, because then it makes what he's doing more covert and hidden, which is what a spy should have going for them. So it's both perfect for the comedy of the character and the tone of the show, and it's realistic for the character.
Right.
Which is hard to find that balance.
One of the things I love about that kind of, I guess I would say, British spy fiction, and now I'm specifically talking about novels, is that people are always operating on multiple levels with hidden motivations and long plays and things that happened a long time ago have an effect on now. And I feel like they very effectively set that up with him right away, you know?
I agree. And you have not read. So just to get into a little bit of the background of this was based on Mick Herron's Slough book series. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly to our British listeners, our numerous British listeners.
I believe it's pronounced Slough.
It's Slough?
Yes.
Now
let's go down to Slough and see all the spies.
And goodbye to our British listeners. Thank you for joining us. So, and you have not read that series.
No, I have. I haven't read all of them, but I read several of them. I read I read this one, Slow Horses, and then I read, I think, one or two more of them after that. But I have not finished the series, and I look forward to it because I enjoy the whole thing.
Oh, well, then I'll be very excited to hear your thoughts on the distinctions or a compare contrast on it. Whatever the case, Will Smith wrote and created the series.
He had to do something to get himself out of the whole Chris Rock slap, right?
I mean, it was a really controversial moment in his career.
Yeah. He was like, how can I switch directions?
Yeah. And so then he's like, I'm going to get into this dry spy genre, British spy genre. No, it's a different Will Smith. Come on, Sean. You're being silly.
No, I know.
It's a white British Will Smith, and he started as a stand-up. He got a job on The Thick of It. He wrote on a lot of Armando Iannucci shows, and he was an actor on The Thick of It too. What a fun career to have.
Yeah, I was thinking that when I was reading through it. I was like, oh boy, this guy really killed it.
And then he gets to write this series. It's just really and you know what? It's a great series. Yeah. He knows what he's doing. There's no argument. So
he's earned his plaudits. Yeah, definitely.
And I don't know. How do you want to get into this? Do you want to stack the concept? Do you want to just start talking from the beginning of the show?
Why don't we just get into it as though we're just seeing it for the first time, and then we could talk through the elements that are interesting and fun about it.
Fantastic.
So first of all, what a phenomenal cold open. We start with a guy in an airport trying to find someone for some reason. Something bad is going to happen, and he's on his I don't know what you call that. Is it a radio, earpiece? I guess? His earpiece? Yeah.
I think it's called a two-way wrist radio.
Yes, it's a Dick Tracy
I think they
thing.
call it the same thing as Dick Tracy called it. Yes. Yeah. He's got an earpiece.
So he's got an earpiece to the control center where everybody's watching closed-circuit television, and they're trying to figure out one guy who is going to do something bad, and he's having all sorts of problems. And one of the things I like about this cold open, and I like this style of writing, even though it can be frustrating sometimes, is that they immediately lapse into jargon you have to understand in order to figure out what's going on. Like they say a thing, and I can't remember the exact line, but it's like dogs in sight, and dogs are the guys who are like the muscle for the spy organization, and they just immediately refer to them as that. And then later they say, one of the guys says, second desk wants you to do this, and second desk is a specific person in this, and you have to understand that this is the person who's almost in charge, but not as in charge as the person above her. So I like just getting into the world right away,
and that they don't slow down for it. I do have a question often with things like this, where it's like Mick Herron. I assume a lot of it's drawn from the novels. Like, is this authentic? Is this, he did a lot of research, but then he extrapolates some of the terminology and the specifics of how the departments are structured and stuff like that, just because it's like, well, this is what I want to happen with the story, so I'm just gonna say this is how MI5 works. I'm always curious about that. Do you happen to know?
I don't know, and I think that's such a good question, because I'm like, does it really matter when I'm immersed in the book or the show whether or not this is real, if it feels completely real?
I think if it does feel, my take is, if it does feel completely real, then it doesn't matter. But usually, and it's interesting when you look at different, I wouldn't even necessarily say budget levels, but even just quality levels of this kind of genre show, it's always fascinating. And one thing I was sort of thinking about, because one of the people that we're introduced to immediately was Kristen Scott Thomas as Diana Taverner. And James Spiderweb is the sort of sleazy, played by Freddie Fox, is the sleazy guy, other guy back at control. But with both of them, particularly Kristen Scott Thomas, it's like when you're put in that kind of, I don't know if you call it like a Tommy Lee Jones style, I'm in charge of the whole thing. Okay, what's going on? All right, have them do this. It's so easy when it's not handled right to see the writer has crammed in a bunch of slang and terminology that they think makes them sound authentic, and then it just doesn't sound quite right, and then the actor doesn't deliver it quite right. It's just like everybody's trying to act cool in the process, and like badass, and it really falls flat so easily. And in this, Kristen Scott Thomas, pro that she is, nails it, and you feel her authority immediately, and she feels at home with the terminology and the situation.
She's so, I don't know how else to say it. She's so aristocratic and like so above everybody else that it just feels like, of course she's they refer to her later in the show as Lady Di because her name is Diana Taverner. And it's like, yeah, she is like kind of looking down her nose at everybody the entire time. And it feels very real.
Yeah. It really does draw you in immediately. And I actually even will say, even on, it's interesting because this was just made by Apple Plus, but even on many British genre shows, particularly I would say when they're showing American characters, which are often played by British people on British TV, but don't always have the handle on the American accents that the imported British actors seem to. I find like often you will see like, this is a cop from America or this is a British cop. And sometimes in, say, BBC style shows, it does feel like the thing I'm talking about where it's like, you're not quite, you're like pretending to be a cool police person show or spy show, but I'm not buying it.
Are you talking about American accents specifically, or?
I'm sorry, I'm saying two different things. Okay. One, which is just that on a lot of BBC shows, they're like, we're going to do our cool thing, and often it's like, you're not quite convincing me that you guys. It feels like you have watched an American kind of genre thing, and you are trying to be kind of as badass as that, and you're not pulling it off. And then step two is they will often, in pursuit of that, cast a British person as an American character, and then the seams are really showing.
The British person as an American character, we don't have to worry about that in this, at least so far, but the British person as an American character always drives me crazy because there are just certain tiny phrases like when somebody British is playing an American and says, I ate his lunch, they'll say, I ate he's lunch, not his lunch. And I'm always like, like it's...
I should have been in that part.
Right. I can eat somebody's lunch. It's definitely an issue.
But obviously, none of that is at play here.
No.
Frankly, I even feel like with stories about MI5, sometimes it's like they're trying to drum up the level of interest. None of that feels right here. It feels like authentic. Everybody's on their game. Everybody seems totally like cool and cynical and badass, and like this is standard, operating procedure to the degree. Not to jump the gun here, but when the reveal happens, not even in the cold open, but in a later scene, that this was all a training exercise, it almost doesn't compute to me. Right. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself if you want to.
Well, no. I mean, you're right that all of this feels completely authentic. So he gets confused because he thinks somebody said one thing when maybe they said something else about who he was looking for. Was it a white shirt with a blue tee, or was it a blue shirt with a white tee?
Right.
And who is he looking for? And he sees a guy that he thinks is the guy with the bomb in his backpack, and they chase that guy down, and of course it turns out to be incorrect. And then he's like, he gets stood down. That's what it is. Second desk says, tell him to stand down. And of course, our hero refuses to be stood down and chases after the other guy and runs through the crowd into the tube, I believe is what it's called. And he gets very close and pulls his gun on the guy. And just then the guy presses the button on the trigger on the device. And that's when we cut out. We kind of go to white, not go to black. We go to white, almost implying a huge explosion there.
And tube is a train. a subway of some kind. Mm-hmm. Right? Is that correct?
The underground.
Yes. Yeah, and it's, as you say, it's incredible. It's a fantastic opening.
The music underneath it is so great all the way through. It really
that's what's fascinating. Is the score is great, and then it leads into possibly one of the greatest theme songs of all time, and obviously it's a logical reason for it because Mick Jagger himself wrote it and performs it. He was asked to perform it. He already was a fan of Mick Herron's books, so he was like, "Oh, I'm ready to go," or it's more, "Oh, I'm ready to go." I think it's probably what more what he sounded like.
Yeah.
Can you do
all can eat is lunch.
Just. Oh God! What better thing could there be to get you in the tone of what the show is going to be?
It's very clear that he is familiar with the show because he so captures the show in the lyrics of the song, and in the attitude of the song. It's really spectacular.
But yeah, you're right. It's both a great score and a great theme song. And then we go right into seeing Jackson Lamb as the first one, right? Who played by the great Gary Oldman.
And what an entrance Gary Oldman makes. We come in on his office, which is messy, and he is asleep, and he farts himself awake. And that just is such a specific character-defining moment of, like, this is who this guy is.
And one of his first... And there, as in The Thick of It and all the other projects he's worked on, there are a million great lines in this. And I do wonder if you have any memory, how many are from the original Herron books?
I don't. I actually tried to read the book again before this, but I just didn't have time.
That's the level of commitment that Sean and I are going to consistently show.
Slight, but not that much.
But you did that in honor of Slough House, that you were trying to be... kind of
I have it on my iPad, and I was trying to commit to doing something well, and I did it poorly, just like the occupants of Slough House.
I mean, I really respect that. But anyway, I was going to say that after he farts, one of the first things Jackson Lamb says, "Another day dawns on, am I fucking useless?" And it's just like a great entry point. Yeah. The thing I'll say right off the top, it's like one of those things that I do wonder if it's like they found the space. I assume that a lot of this is shot in the studio, or did they build it from scratch? But it's just such an effective, convincing, shitty, low rent office to set this in. It's like there's stains on the walls. The lighting is kind of depressing. Like, all of it really feels like, oh, man, this would be a fucking bummer to work here.
And there's piles of files and crap everywhere. And, at least in Jackson Lamb's office, there's lots of food left over from various meals on the table there. It's just... Another thing I love, which I think is directly from the books, is that anytime anybody goes in and out of it, the door doesn't work properly. They have to shove the door to get it to open even.
And so, this is a great detail.
Yeah. And even I would say, because yes, it's just drab and awful and whatever. And then the first person we see is Standish walking down the street, and again, she's just kind of a drab, mousy civil service person, and here she is working for MI5. And we always, I don't know, I always associate, all these spy things with like glamour and shaken not stirred and let's go to the south of France and all that stuff. So it's fun to see people who are just cogs in the wheel,
Yeah. I do wonder if there must be some equivalent. I think the thing that's probably unusual is that they're a department, as we find out, of sort of disgraced or disenfranchised operatives, and that's what the purpose of Slough House is. But that they're still operatives feels like the thing that's the leap. That they're still like, they're still in the field, they're still doing stuff, just the crappy stuff. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's based on some reality.
Well, but to that point, that's kind of what we establish over the next few minutes is we see River, our hero from the cold open, bringing in bags of trash to sort through. And then we see Standish going around and handing out assignments to people that are like, we need you to check through all the parking tickets for the last 10 years on this particular thing, or just all kinds of boring records things.
Yeah.
And everybody is kind of stuck doing this shitty busy work that of course has to get done, but is not anything interesting or challenging in any way.
I also like that River Cartwright is played by Jack Lowden. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Who's kind of a perfect hero in that you buy him as an agent and as the lead, certainly, and he's, an attractive person, but he's not like, name your James Bond. He's not any of them in terms of like that level of stature or handsomeness.
George Lazenby.
Sure. Yes. Maybe he's close to George Lazenby. So it's kind of he is almost a buyable TV version of a more average guy in MI5.
Right. And he's young and he's like, he wants to do stuff. He's still, he still has that naivete of not having been worn down by the system, even though he fucked up and ended up in this place. He's like, we got to do things. We got to solve things.
Yeah.
Which is important. Then we see in a coffee shop, which I think is supposed to be right nearby, although I'm not quite sure. We see one of the other operatives
Sid Baker, played by Olivia Cook.
Yes, she's the House of Dragons queen.
That's correct.
And she spills coffee on a fella, and when he goes to get towels, she grabs his thumb drive and downloads it into her computer. So there's already some spy subterfuge going on.
Right. And she's immediately set up as like the most competent operative, like leagues above, which of course raises questions about why she is even there. Do they talk about that in the pilot? I forgot. Or even ask the question, or is that saved for later?
I think it's later. I don't think it's in the pilot. And I immediately was like, well, this woman is able to work with people who can ride dragons, so why is she hanging out in this place?
I mean, this is valid. But I mean, why even bother with any kind of spy actions or?
If you can just hitch a ride on a dragon.
Yeah, I guess they'll explain that in a later season.
No spoilers. So anyway, she steals the guy's thumb drive and then puts it right back. She's very good at it, and he doesn't notice right away. And then we're back with River, and this is again just a funny thing that when Jackson Lamb wants to talk to somebody, he just pounds on the floor so they know that he wants their attention and they should come up to his office.
Yeah.
Like, what a dick,
And it's justified because it's the shitty wing, but then everything in it is analog. Like everybody has files and there's banging on the floor. Nobody's, it's like their thumb drives and such, but it's within Slough House itself. It's very kind of old school. It's very comforting.
So he goes up to talk to Jackson Lamb. And again, here's another great Jackson Lamb line. He says, I am surrounded by fuck-ups, and you are the gold standard. He basically says he's trying to make River quit.
Right. And he sort of immediately kind of gives him crap for basically being a Nepo baby for his, his grandfather kind of saving his ass after he blew it. And that's when also we find out that the train blowing up was just a training exercise and nobody really died. I guess I have a question to you, sort of writing wise on that. I had forgotten that from my last viewing of it. How do you feel about it not being like, my guess is the reason that they did that is that it's sort of, first it's a surprise, like, oh, it's a fake. I thought that people actually died. But I also wonder if it's just like maybe rolls the dice too much with the audience's sympathies for River if he actually is responsible for the deaths of these people. Although I guess my feeling is, wouldn't it have been more dramatically effective if it actually did, a terrible thing did happen? Because the truth is, if you watch closely, it is Spider's fuck up in the first scene. He tells him the wrong t-shirt combo, and then River is just following it, which is why River is in his rights to blame Spider later. So theoretically, even if it had gone badly and he was blamed for it, you still have the sympathy of the character. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question is, how do you feel about it turning out to be a fake?
Well, here's my take on it. First of all, the Spider giving him the wrong information, I believe, turns into a much bigger deal down the line. So I don't want to spoil anything with that.
Okay.
But you're right. It was Spider's fault. I went back and watched it again, and he says the first thing and then changes it the second time he says it. So, yeah, of course, it was not his fault. I think that if 49 people had actually died, right, it just would be so devastating to that character. Whereas if it's a training exercise, he can do what he does, which those people weren't real. They weren't real. It doesn't matter. Who cares? And
I think that's that's a legitimate point, that if you have the actual deaths, then you're saying something about his character if he's moved on from that and he's still ambitious. Whereas,
right, he can't just turn around and be like, "We got to fix things and get me out of Slough House." He's like,
right,
I should just kill myself because I'm responsible for all these people dying.
Right. Yeah. However, it being the way it is, then it kind of did remind me of Patriot in the fact that immediately. And I understand that there's sort of maybe more layers to what was going on with the misinformation, but he's given misinformation and then he is blamed for it. And that very much reminded me of Patriot, of the system is almost rigged, that no matter how hard you're trying, they're not going to let you do a good job, or it's not going to turn out well.
Right. But the other thing it made me think about, which I think is interesting, is it makes MI5 seem like this huge, capable operation that they can do all that stuff in a situation like that as a training exercise, while there's all sorts of other things going on. It's such a vast canvas that they're painting on, and it's like, this is how big our organization is. We need to use this to train our people. So we're going to do this thing that's going to... I mean, he really fucked up that one cop, right? He really maybe broke that guy's arm or something.
Right.
And so MI5 just has that much... I don't know what you want to call it, power or whatever, that they can use people that way.
Well, I kind of wonder, because Spider shows him the footage later as though it's an example of a failed exercise. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of the thing that when I was like, you didn't fool me completely, I was like, when I was cynical the first, before I realized this was going to be a great show, I was kind of like, yeah, I mean, if you have him do things that no one would do in a training exercise, like knock out a cop and all that stuff, then sure, you're going to fool me. I guess in retrospect, I can kind of put that into the category of well, that's indicating to what degree Cartwright is obsessed with proving himself and being in the heat of the action.
He doesn't want people to think he's a nepo baby.
Right. It's also interesting that it's kind of the way a show handles, for lack of a better comparison, Captain Kirk style Kobayashi Maru test, right? Which, for those of you who don't know, is the test where he alters sort of a no-win scenario, that he alters the conditions of the test so that he can win. And in some ways, Cartwright is like, well, I know you're telling me to stand down. I'm not going to stand down. I'm still going to try and win this, thus compounding his error. But it is sort of because we're so conditioned to be he's doing it anyway. He's going to be the rogue, and therefore he's going to come out on top. It is that much more surprising when it's ooh, he got screwed.
Right. Then we have a scene between River and Sid, which is immediately a sort of classic will there, won't they scene, right? There's a lot of crackling sexual tension between them.
Right.
Which, of course, we need because we're human beings and we crave connection, even when it's between people that aren't us.
It's a very dark spin. One that I agree with 100%, obviously.
But River then points out, like, why are we paying so much attention to this failed journalist? What's going on? Something weird is, like, his MI5 brain is overriding his Slough House actions, and he's going, there's something weird going on here. We need to figure out what it is.
And generally speaking, Jackson Lamb's take on all this, which makes him more both enigmatic and funny and also frustrating, is like, this has nothing to do with you. This does not concern you. Don't worry about it. I'm in charge. So he's asking a lot of questions, setting up his, like, you know, that he's this juiced up to, I got to figure it out. I got to be in the middle of the action. And Jackson kind of, you know, batting him away. And I guess even immediately I did suspect that there were going to be more layers. But Will Smith really handles it well in top-loading it to make you kind of I assume, based on the structure of this show, that we're slowly going to realize that Jackson Lamb is, you know, faking his disinterest and his incompetence, and it slowly does illustrate that is the case. But they do a good job of kind of holding that back as long as they can.
Yeah, you're right. It's just there's always other levels of stuff going on. Like, I think ultimately what you realize is that by Jackson Lamb doing what he does and sort of batting away Rivers' questions, he is, you know, reverse psychologizing him into being more curious and more interested and more willing to try to find out the stuff he needs to find out. So it's very manipulative in a sense.
I think it is. I think that's the thing you can always kind of feel comfortable with, that it's manipulation because he is a high level spy. But I think what's interesting is, and this is why it's sort of so fascinating to watch him and his interaction with his staff, is that, not to get into specific spoilers, but if you want to skip ahead 15 seconds, he kind of sometimes is doing it as reverse psychology. Sometimes he might be doing it to protect them and actually keep them from harm's way by not having them get involved in the situation. He has a multitude of motivations at any given moment.
Well, and this is not exactly the same thing, but the next couple of scenes are very much, he is performing certain actions that we think are one thing, but they actually are something else. Like, he talks to second desk, Lady Di, Kristen Scott Thomas, who says, send the thumb drive over and send it with Sid. She's the most capable of everybody in the Slough house.
Right.
Then we see Sid go out for coffee, and Jackson Lamb immediately pounds on the floor to get River to come up, and he's going to have River take the thing over to the main headquarters, whatever it's called, Regent's Park. And that felt, in retrospect, as I was watching it, I was like, oh, he purposely waited to not give it to Sid, to give it to Jackson, to inject him into the situation at Regent's Park, to find out more information, to see what was going on. And, you know, it all works out that way. Right.
And I would say most of the time that's the way it sort of plays out, is that he's doing something that seems like he's frustrated when actually he's. But sometimes it is like, you know, you can't control these situations. And it does feel like often Lady Di is working, you know, in a different direction than he is.
Right.
It's really fascinating.
So River takes the computer first he has to get it out of the flash box, which he does, blows up his hand, basically.
Right.
And he has to sort of pretend that never happened. I don't totally understand how you would get away with that. Like, if something was sealed up and then it got there and it wasn't sealed up anymore, I don't know how you would be like, oh, no, it never was. It wasn't sealed up.
I guess he's just depending on the miscommunication that would happen in any system.
Right. So he goes to see Spider Webb,
who is the gentleman who screwed him on his training exercise. and is perfectly cast. Like, I don't know what Freddie Fox has done other than this, but he is such a Draco Malfoy annoying.
Other than this and having the name Freddie Fox, it's like,
I guess he was born into it.
Yeah. Like, yeah, if you were writing a story about a British asshole, you would name him Freddie Fox,
It's great. It's really effective, an effective antagonist to set up immediately. Just a little weaselly person. Also, it's kind of funny that he got stuck in HR after what happened. So
right, and he won't admit that it's HR. He's like, it's personnel or something like that.
Right.
So it's just a good, like, sort of competitive scene between the two of them where they're both trying to be more important than the other one, and Webb is making fun of him for fucking up the training exercise, and he's making fun of Webb for being in HR, even though he's jealous of the fact that Webb is in the main headquarters. I mean, that's one of the things I like about that scene, too, is you can see how much he desperately wants to be in the middle of things as opposed to out in the middle of nowhere like he is.
It's also great at building up just how poorly River is treated when he goes into MI5. Mm-hmm. It really is relatable of, like, they print out a specific temporary ID for him. He has to be escorted. He's made to wait. It's all these things that are just these minor, ego bruises along the way.
Then we're back with Jackson Lamb, and Standish comes into his office, and he very ostentatiously pours himself a glass of whiskey and pours a glass that's clearly for her. She doesn't take it, and she leaves, and that obviously is a thing between them.
And I would just to jump ahead, because I find this to be a fascinating moment. And I don't remember. I am sort of at the beginning, I believe, of season 2, and I want to finish the rest of the show. So we don't have to get into specifics. There's more that's revealed about Standish, this assistant, that's implied even in this pilot. So it's not really a spoiler that something's going on with her. But one of the things is that later in the episode, she's in AA, which we have to assume, as we can almost be certain, that Jackson Lamb knows. Because when I first saw that, I was like, oh, is he making a move on her? And that's why she's being standoffish. But then it's like, oh, is he testing her? Is it like with Cartwright and he's just fucking with her? And if that's the case, is he fucking with her to keep up this facade of being a dick to everyone? It's like, what's going on? Do you know if that particular moment is revealed later? Like why he would give her the alcohol?
I don't remember, but I do feel like it is that. It is him both testing her and proving what an asshole he is so that she doesn't feel like they're friends ever,
Right.
And he's like, yeah, let's do this. Come on, give up. You're an alcoholic, so why not have a drink?
Right. But just to see if she will do it, and like maybe whether he can depend on her.
I don't even think it's to see if I think he knows she won't, so he feels safe doing that. But when he does it, it comes across as him doing it to see if she will respond to it. So it makes him look like a jerk for doing that.
Right. So I guess, again, it's multi-layered.
Yeah. I hope I didn't just say something that doesn't make any sense, but I'm trying.
No, I think it makes sense. Or it made sense to me, so that's an audience of one.
That's all I care. That's all I care about. I don't care if anybody listens to the show or not.
Well, I think you, luckily.
Nothing to worry about. Okay, so everybody's going home. River sees Jackson eating Chinese food, which I thought was just a funny callback to sending that guy to check and see if any of the people at the Chinese food shop were undocumented. Like he's basically going around the neighborhood trying to get free dinners from every place that has people working at it.
And what's funny about that in particular, and you could argue, oh, that's just him creating the facade more, but I feel like that is a thing of like, I'd like some free Chinese.
Yes.
So that's just a legitimately fucking douchey thing that he's doing. Is fucking shaking down these poor people that work in a Chinese restaurant. It's really nice.
I agree that is a different layer of his character that has nothing to do with him trying to show off to other people what a dick he is. It's more just like, I'm going to take advantage of whatever I can.
I would just say, since we're sort of in the heart of the office now also, just to say, Will Smith does such a great job, even to the point of when I was first watching it, I was like, this feels a little slow that they're spending all this time on the other characters, but they really do pay off and they build them nicely and you get slowly invested in these characters. It almost does have more of a BBC style pacing than an American version of this show. But there's, I don't know if I'm saying this correct, Strawn Loy, who's played by Paul Higgins, who's like, he's the loser who's constantly trying to invite everybody out, go out for a pint, and Louisa Guy, played by Rosalind Eliezer, who's sort of one of the more competent but lower level people in the office, and Peter Judd, played by Samuel West, and is just populated with these other characters that they're nicely set up and also nicely add to the feeling of sort of desolateness and just like average standard people in an office. You know, the annoying guy, the other people are sort of tired of, people trying to flirt with each other that are in an office that are give you that feeling of like, this isn't the MI5 that you would have in your brain. It's just a basic office. And even Jed, who's one of the dogs, who's immediately like angry and a little bit of a dangerous feeling goon. And they're all pretty quickly set up, which is really nice writing.
I would agree, except I would go even further. Like, they're set up, but in such a tiny way. Like, we don't really know a ton about any of them. I feel like the one we know the most about is Roddy, the computer guy. Like, he's the most developed of all those characters. Right. And I think that shows and it's not surprising, it shows such a confidence of like, no, we'll find out about these people later. We're going to introduce them now, but we have much more important things to focus on in this pilot. Like, they're all very interesting characters, but we don't need to show our whole hand because we don't have room for it. This show is only so long, and we'll get to them in later episodes, but right now we're just going to briefly touch on each of them so that you know that they're there.
And I don't know if that was that they had confidence in Smith over at Apple, the executives, or if they, generally speaking, are going to lean more toward like, look, we're trying to establish ourselves as a premium television outlet, so we're just going to have confidence that the audience will be along with us. Because I do feel like it's hard to tell sometimes, like with Severance, which we covered. It's like, well, you got an 800-pound gorilla in Ben Stiller, so maybe he's giving pushback on, it's okay, we can take our time to establish this. Also, that's more of a mystery box kind of show, so it's sort of built in that you don't know what all the things are.
It's one of those shows, happening. Like, I get it.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Yes, it's one of those shows. One of those shows where you're just the whole time. You're like, you're trying to prove that you're smarter than me, show. But I agree with you. I think that they sort of draw with light brushstrokes, knowing that they're going to get to it when they get to it.
Yeah.
And Roddy Ho is one of the characters that's like, and I would say in your standard show, more of a network American version of this show, you would have Roddy Ho, certainly. You would have, played by Christopher Chung, very, very adeptly, he's a little bit of a rascal, annoying IT guy, but he's kind of lovable. And they kind of go a couple of steps harder on Roddy Ho just being like,
total asshole. Yeah.
What a dick.
Yeah.
Which is great that the people in this office are to some degree just antagonists even to each other.
And I will say, I think this is one of the advantages of adapting a book series is those characters are already so well drawn so far into the future that you can have them you can find those pieces to put out there in that first episode that totally fit with what we're going to find out about them later on. Whereas I feel like in a traditional show, you're sort of figuring out the characters as you go along. Like you have an idea for who the character is, but as you start to build episodes, you go, oh, well, he said this in this episode, so that means he's more like this. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does to me. Again,
well, that's all I care about, as I said.
It's useful for you that I'm the one here.
So then we see River in his office watching a nationalist speech. Sid comes in and wants to know what he's doing there. And then, of course, Jackson, without making any noise or being obtrusive in any way, just shows up in the doorway in the middle of the night and scares the shit out of both of them.
Now, I thought they were implying in that moment that he was Batman.
Yes.
That's what Batman
when, in fact, he's the commissioner, right? Or the... was he the commissioner?
Commissioner Gordon? Is that what you're saying? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I even like Olivia Cook's like, just kind of like... I don't remember, is it... maybe it's an earlier scene that he says the phrase failure is contagious. It's just, I love that as a phrase he's throwing out. But also that I thought he was saying no extracurricular activities. And because they had been playing such a will they or won't they, I thought that he was saying in terms of getting involved with each other.
Don't fuck, yeah.
But he's really just saying, don't do anything that I don't tell you to do. And he really threatens them with it. Mm-hmm. And that to me is another indication of like, well, why would somebody who doesn't give a fuck actually bother to tell his workers not to do this? And it's only because of some element of like, I have a plan or I'm the one who should be holding those cards because you guys are going to screw it up. Like, I see the chessboard, don't
Right,
interfere.
and I would even go farther and say there could be personal danger involved,
Right.
It's like, you guys aren't experienced enough. I mean, I don't think this is a spoiler, but we already know he's been in MI5 for a long time, so he has lots of experience. So
right.
He does see things differently from people who are brand new to the whole thing, It's kind
of a perfect pilot setup in the sense that when you establish characters like Sid and Jackson in this place, you know why Cartwright's there. Cartwright screwed up. So then that immediately almost, it's got to be a better word than impregnate, but impregnates the plot with this aspect of like, oh, what is going to be each person's thing in kind of like a Lost style way. And this is why it's effective, not just as a show, but a first episode of a series to pull you forward, is all these little things, little questions like that, or make you kind of lean forward and go like, oh, okay, yeah, you got me. I want to see what the answers to those questions are going to be, but not in a way that seems empty. It seems like you've interested us enough in the characters that I'm on board for having faith that you're going to tell me an interesting answer to that question.
Right. Like, I want to know how this guy got impregnated into Slough House,
That's right. It's all about what will those babies look like when they are born, metaphorically.
So Hobson, I forget his name, Hobson, the reporter, is back at the...
Hobden?
Hobden. Yeah. He knows she looked at his thumb drive. Now he's panicking.
Right. Do they establish how? Do we see that?
No, it just, he clearly goes back there looking for her because he knows something is up.
Which is another playing to the top of your intelligence in terms of the script moment of like that they don't overplay that hand. You just have to
Right. It would just make sense that somebody would go, oh, somebody got onto this thumb drive. Doesn't Roddy figure out that it's just pi to the infinite number? So he was expecting somebody to try to take his thumb drive.
Right.
He set it up as a trap. Basically.
Oh, right. So then that would imply that he had some kind of thing that would tell him somebody had done that.
Right.
And
then we see Jackson drinking. We see Standish at AA. We see a flashback from her of some terrible thing that happened where she was, because the person in AA is talking about this is when I really started drinking too much. And while she's saying that, Standish flashes back to something that happened where she's walking into a house and she sees blood in the in the bathroom, and that.
Oh, see, I thought that was saying that she was time traveling in that moment, so I was confused.
You thought she was time traveling and she had dyed her hair while she was doing that?
Yeah. Well, yes, I thought that she had quickly, while she went into the time travel device, she dyed her hair, she changed her clothes, she went to get her hair styled, and then suddenly she was in the past, walking into a stranger's apartment.
Could I get my roots colored? Oh, going time traveling again, are we?
And I thought, oh, well, here's where they played it too much to the top of his intelligence, because I don't know what's going on. Why is this time traveler in this show?
So then she comes back to the present. And this is where we first see the great Jonathan Pryce as River's grandfather.
Correct.
They're cooking dinner together.
I like also the, as they call them, the spook stuff, where he says, you left the door open, and he's like, I saw you coming up the street. So it's like one level of like, you're not protecting yourself. I'm afraid you're maybe senile. No, I was one step ahead of you. And even that you don't even know who's telling the truth. Like maybe he is senile. Who knows?
And they have a conversation, and he asks if Lamb was ever good at his job, which means Lamb is effectively pulling the wool over his eyes. And the grandfather does not answer him. Then we see Hobson saying there's going to be an attack of some sort, and people are going to die. Then we have a nice moment where we cut to somebody doing an open mic that we've never seen before.
Now, what was when you first watched this? I don't know if you remember. Were you like, come on, I don't need to watch more. I don't need to watch one more open mic on TV.
I spent half my life in fucking open mics, please. Well, and also I was like, how did this open mic get a real audience? That's fake.
That is the most. That's when they stepped outside of their box. Although Will Smith was a stand-up, so
well. And to be fair, like when I was on tour a few years ago, I can remember going to I don't know where, someplace in the Midwest somewhere, and they did have an open mic on like Tuesday evenings, and it was a huge deal, like a huge audience was there to see all the young comics, you know?
Crazy.
So I think outside New York and LA, maybe there is a possibility for people to, and obviously London is outside New York and LA, so maybe that's where that comes from.
Maybe that's where you should move, Sean. You know,
Can I get my roots done?
You time traveling?
So this is where we find out what was in the box, and that it was a laptop, and it was Hobden, and he used to be a communist, and, you know, the park is trying to avoid blowback by using Slough House.
I hope I'm right about that.
So now we're back at the comedy place where the guy is telling a joke about Jesus, Buddha, and Allah walk into a bar, and everybody immediately gets offended, which is hilarious to me because he hasn't even said anything offensive yet, you know?
Yeah.
They're playing up the woke aspect of audiences. And it's also, there's also a funny element to this where one guy is going on stage and the other guy is writing material for him. And the guy who's going on stage is going, you are so funny. You got to get up there. Your material is so great. And then you hear the material and you're like, not so much, you know? Which is classic stand-up in anything, you know?
What do you mean?
Just like whenever stand-up is in a movie or a TV show.
Oh, stand-up in any media.
It's not good unless it's actually somebody doing stand-up, you know? It's always.
You mean somebody doing something that was actually stand-up in life?
Or I'm really even saying, like, if it's somebody's stand-up special. Like, I think it's even hard to take real stand-up and do it in a TV show because it's just
100%. It's like Punchline, even in Lenny.
Yeah.
It's like any version of stand-up that is not just the stand-up doing their work. It's so fascinating how much confidence.
Marvelous Mrs. Maisel does a decent job, and so does Hacks, but they're still both like, oh, God, no, you know?
Right. But also, I feel like that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but like in Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, it's like period stand-up. So it's even though...
You're saying that because she's a woman?
I mean, somebody had to say it, so... because it takes place in another era. It's almost like she's charming and she's got good rhythm and the lines are, but it's not supposed to be like, that's fucking, razor sharp stand up. And by the same token in Hacks, she's supposed to be a very particular kind of, a Vegas comic that once had a sitcom kind of. So she's funny, but it's not supposed to be like, more of the sharp stuff is supposed to be the dialogue, not the stand-up. So there's a buy. Whereas if you're saying, as in the ones that I referenced, that it's like, no, this guy just destroyed. Then it's like, now you're fighting an uphill battle.
Good luck. Yeah.
Yeah, Sally Field is doing a good job for Sally Field.
So then...
Of stand-up. She's obviously one of the most talented actresses that ever
Well, you love her. You really love her, right?
I love Sally. That's when she said that, even though I was a child, I went, yes, I do. I do, Sally Field. She said, like me. Now, she didn't say love. She wasn't saying love. She said, you like me.
Oh, okay.
She wasn't being that presumptuous.
Well, I'm rewriting history. So, yes. So this is where we find out Roddy looks at the computer and he says it's just pie, and we know that the guy was expecting a snatch. And then, speaking of expecting a snatch, we see the guy coming out of the stand-up show gets beaten and thrown in a van. Now, sometimes I feel like I've been at stand-up shows where some of the comics deserve that after the show, but in this case, that guy didn't even get on stage, so it was unfair that he was treated that way. But then we see them, he's on TV with today's newspaper. He's been taken hostage, and they're going to cut his head off tomorrow morning. And the last thing we see is Jackson Lamb going, "Where's River?" And River determinedly walking up the street like he's gonna do something about this.
Which is an interesting... How do you feel about that as a sort of cliffhanger-y kind of, show ender?
I thought it was fine. It wasn't one where I was like, yes, what's he going to do? It was like, I didn't have a sense. I guess this is what would make a difference for me. If I had a sense of where he was going or what he was going to do or how he was going to find stuff out, I would feel like it was a stronger ending. I get it. I get that he's still determined and he's
You get it.
that he's going to figure this out, but there's no like, oh, he's going to go talk to this guy, or he's going to go get a free Chinese meal, or, there's nothing specific happening.
That would have been a better ending if he was like, you see him enjoying the noodles. You just got a free Chinese meal. This is kind of, well, I don't know if we want to go into it immediately, our sort of closing remarks, but I have two things to say. One is, this is why... because I feel like we've been falling into a pattern where we evaluate how successful the episode was as a TV episode, one episode of television, and then how a second sort of rating where we figure out whether it was successful as a pilot in terms of hooking us and getting us to pull forward. And I think, to your point about this ending, it's not a good classic... mystery box style, like cliffhanger, like, oh boy. It's like just, oh, he's going to continue to try to thwart.
For it to be a cliffhanger, he has to be hanging off a cliff. And in this, he's just on a nature walk, basically.
See, I've always felt like you've been too strict on this cliffhanger requirement.
But, there's no jeopardy. There's no like, oh no, what's going to happen to River? It's just like, on to the next thing.
I guess the implication is he's going to, enter the den of snakes. But I think it's more just Jackson doesn't want him to be operating on his own, and he's out there operating on his own.
Would it have helped if, instead of ending where it did, it went a little further and he walked into a video store and rented the film Cliffhanger with Sylvester Stallone?
Well, then definitely there would be no argument from, any Apple executive that it's like this ends on a cliffhanger. It ends on the most well-known cliffhanger, unless you're a fan of the video game Cliffhanger, based on Castle Cagliostro by Miyazaki.
Well, I would say that even then, the other cliffhanger is more well-known.
You know what? You're right. Anyhow, just to scoop up one more line that I enjoyed from Gary Oldman is bringing you people up to speed is like trying to explain Norway to a dog. Just so many great little lines, of course, masterfully delivered. But yeah, I mean, to me, that's not that much of a cliffhanger. And it kind of illustrates to me how effective it is as a pilot, because there have been so many things that I kind of want to see explored or addressed, whether it's stuff about the characters or what's really going on with Lamb, or I'm not as invested even in the spy plot as I am the world, which is, I mean, I think truly like, oh, well, you're sitting pretty if you're doing that, because the plots are always going to be episode to episode. So you have to be invested in the world. And I thought they did that. Sean, because we have such a handle on this, do we have a rating? Do we have a number rating at this point?
No, we don't. No.
Okay, great. Then I will just say it was very effective to me as a plot. And I will go further to say it was very effective to me as an episode of television I watched. All the characters were really interesting and funny and cynical. And I loved the take, and that we're following these supposed losers. It was just really enjoyable all around.
Yeah, so you would give it 5 free Chinese meals for both.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. 5 shakedowns.
No, I agree. I thought it was a great episode of television with a through line that was interesting and subtle, but also easy to follow. I love the characters. And I do absolutely want to see what's going to happen next. I mean, obviously, the cliffhanger is not for River. The cliffhanger is for this poor guy we know nothing about, except that he's too much of a pussy to get on stage and do his own jokes. So he has somebody else do them for him.
Right.
And they ain't that great. Maybe he's doing the right thing because his jokes ain't that great. So he knows better than to get up there and do them. But it is compelling to know, okay, how are they gonna make sure this guy doesn't, or are they gonna make sure this guy doesn't get his head chopped off? You know?
I think that is true. I think that is effective stakes. But I almost wonder if there should have been something a little bit more cliffhangery for the ending. Mm-hmm. I might be one of my only things that I kind of question. I think what they were sort of, I believe that they must have been aiming for, is to have that kind of weight and authenticity of a British spy novel, of a BBC kind of a spy show, but juice it up a little bit, budget higher, better cast, a little bit more momentum, a la an American version of the show. And I think they really draw that balance really well.
You just lost half our listeners by mentioning Allah.
Well, I'm going to go back to my open mic and perfect it. It'll be better later, guys.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Cliffhangers.
Show where we analyze only the ends of TV and film. That's a great idea for it.
By the way, Agustin pointed out that they did a good job with stand-up on Crashing, which was the Pete Holmes show, which I agree with. But I think that's because, again, it was a lot of people doing their actual stand-up, you know? They were basically playing themselves in that show.
Also, am I wrong that Pete Holmes also did a lot of sort of nightmare gigs where he fails or something else happens?
On the show? Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So there's that. There's also obviously Seinfeld and Louis, but I guess I put that this fits in with Pete Holmes, but I guess I put that slightly differently because that's the stand-up doing their act or a version of their act themselves.
Right.
In a venue, so they have total control over it, right. Which is different than having an actor do an act that has not been honed or tested, performed by an actor that is not a stand-up.
Right. Well, I think we're going to have to watch episode 2.
I think you're right, Sean. Okay, folks, then that's our show. We'd love it if you could rate, review, or subscribe to Co-Pilots TV on any of your local podcast sources, iTunes, Spotify. And also, if you want to give us 5 stars and give us a nice review, then we will give you your pilot's wings.
I got my pilot's wings.
Well, I feel like you didn't because we don't make them. So you probably... Did you saying you just crafted your own?
No, they came in the mail. They came in the mail.
I think this is another dream you had, Sean. I don't think this is real because we don't have pilot's wings. But you metaphorically will get them, so please give us 5 stars somewhere. And check out patreon.com/CopilotTV. We're going to be throwing content up. We'll have discussions. Maybe we'll have some polls, and we'll keep you updated there about what's going on with the pod. So feel free to jump into that. Sean, anything else you want to offer them?
No, I like them. I like the people who listen to this show. I think they're very sweet. And I hope they continue and spread the word, and we'll keep plugging away with various pilots. There's always new ones.
And I like only the British listeners.
They all left.
I'm just finding my... Oh, did they? Well, there you go. That was bad. That was a bad call on my part. I like you guys, too.
See ya. Yeah.
We are ready to grab our carry-ons and make our way to baggage claim.
Oh, boy. Here's how you pronounce this word. Sluuf. Sluuf. Like, I've seen a million videos like that.
If the YouTube video then goes into QAnon, I would find a different one.